Welcome to another GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe, our first of 2023. So everybody that's on the call with us today has 100% attendance for 2023. Congratulations, and we hope you'll keep it up. Today, John Blake's going to walk us through a new assessment that is available to GRIP-Birkman coaches. Our Values is the name of it. John, exactly what is the Our Values assessment?
Yeah, so our values, we wanted to create a team-based values assessment that would enable ministry teams to understand, to look at how they're uniquely driven, how individuals are motivated and driven, and really understanding the underlying values. And we wanted to create a simple way for them to, again, facilitate a meaningful conversation. We know in our community, the assessment, all that any assessment does is allow us to have the right conversations with a shared language. And so we believe that this is a really important one, and was something that we felt was a gap currently in what we've seen, not only available through IDA and the GRIP-Birkman community, but really in the marketplace, that there really is a gap for team-based values assessments.
How exactly do we define how do we define values, just values in general? How do we define those?
Yeah, so, values really are an underlying drive or motivation that moves us forward. It's what is innate and internal to us that becomes a lens through which we do everything in life, that we do our work, that we have our relationships, that we interact with people. It's a lens. A lot of times we'll talk about culture as being the lens at which we look through the world. Well, really what culture is it's a combination of shared values. And so values on a very personal level then become something by which I'm going to look at the world and the surroundings. So they come from a variety of places, and there's a lot of research out there on this. I'm not going to pretend to be some PhD on values, but really they're going to come from both our upbringing. They're going to come through major life experiences, both positive and negative. And they're going to come from the relationships around us. Those will also enhance or develop, push our values in different directions as well.
Why is it important then for us to be looking at this when we're doing team coaching?
Yeah, as we begin to look at the things that cause team conflict, that cause teams to be effective. So either end of the spectrum, what causes us to be truly, effective at what we're trying to do, or what really is getting in the way. A lot of those things come back to what are our individual values? What are those things that frankly seem natural to me? I'm passionate about them. There's a conviction around them. And so as you begin to hit on those things, they become potentially a word that our culture loves right now. They become a trigger, right? It becomes a trigger of you're connecting with me deeply, or on the negative side, it becomes a trigger for you don't care about me. You don't care about what's really important to me. And a lot of times people can't care about what's important to me because we've never put words to it. And again, this assessment gives us language to be able to say, no, I really value autonomy. It doesn't mean that I hate people. It means that I want to be able to speak into it so that when we're working together, there's the opportunity for me to feel like I've had a say in the matter. And so again, it gives us a space for meaningful conversations, meaningful to who we are, that allows us then as a team to understand that, so we can honor it in the context of us doing our work, in the context of us living out our relationships, that allows us to have deeper relationships and more meaningful work, really.
Don't you think, though, that a lot of teams probably assume that they are all thinking the same, that they all have the same values?
Yeah, I mean, on this call, we're all a part of this because of GRIP-Birkman, right? We're a part of this, and we know through GRIP-Birkman that underlying needs really could be this idea that everyone thinks similar to what I think, right? And so the idea of communication, then I'm going to do as others need done unto them. Well, I can't do that, and until I understand underlying needs, my default is always going to be to communicate out of what my values are. My default is always going to be to approach it from where I come from and from what is important to me, until we have the conversation and then realize that, oh, you really value beauty. You're not just saying that the PowerPoint was ugly. There's an aesthetic quality that is important to you, whereas I think that that's frivolous, or that's, and so this is where we can unintentionally have rub in some of these spaces.
Okay. So coming back to the importance of a team doing this together, when would you suggest that a team ought to do the values assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that this assessment, out of all the assessments that we have, may come to be one of the most versatile that we have. And what I mean by that is that I believe the opportunity for us to have a meaningful conversation around values can happen and should happen at different points in any team's journey. So I do believe on the formation stage, as you're beginning the conversation, I think there's true value in having a conversation around values. I think just as a development activity, if I look again at what is a simplistic way to have a quick, meaningful conversation, I believe this actually could happen in an hour. I think that you could really dig into that small of an amount of time and really facilitate something meaningful around this. And on the flip side, I think you could extend it into 2 days easily. And that may seem extreme, but we can talk about some of those other things. The other space that I think will be common where this is going to be brought forward, I don't know that it'll be facilitated as much. We'll have to figure out, time will tell with this, is a team that's in conflict, a team that is struggling. The other key place would be a team in transition. Anytime you take a team member away or add a new team member, you got a new team. And so we understand that then the values are going to play into this as well. So this is a pretty versatile one. I don't know that I have a default yet where I would say this is when it most critically should be used. But I would say that at any of those junctures, there would be value. And it's a slightly different conversation, but I don't think it's a completely different conversation at any of those points.
You mentioned even a team in conflict. What if a coach is working with a team in conflict and they come to discover that part of the problem is they really do have opposing values?
Yeah, when we begin to talk about what are the uniquenesses of our values, the biggest uniqueness in our values from any other values assessment that I've reviewed that's out there is that we're going to ask individuals to identify their low values and not just their high values. Those low values can either be things that are true aversions, like I don't like that, or it can be blind spots. It can be I just don't think about it, or it can be it's important, it's just not as important as the others. Any of those things can be true of low values. But what those actually then create are this place again of something that I'm saying is not as significant to me, and we're juxtapositioning that against something that potentially is high for someone else. So what's the impact if someone has integrity as their this is my mantle to carry. We are going to, be an organization of integrity, and someone else says, it's important, but it's not on my top list. So what could that do as far as team dynamics and as far as the way that we interact? And so a team that's in conflict, if you're coaching a team that's in conflict, I think that this just gives you a different window into some of those things that may be causing the conflict, and a new set of questions that could be valuable for us to unpack, a new set of questions, a new lens to put on some of these conflicts that frankly are challenging. It's hard to find what's going to be the right lever to help people begin to understand each other so that they can create a pathway forward together.
You said something earlier about with or without a coach. If a team is in conflict, would you recommend that they do this assessment without a coach?
I'm going to be biased. I don't think a team should ever do this without a coach. And I'll go ahead and I'll throw out the other side. I was probably one of the strongest proponents of we need to create this so that they don't have to have a coach. So it sounds like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. I'm really not. I believe that this is important enough that we need to make it available. And there's value in someone that hasn't been trained as a coach or facilitator to gain meaning and value from this for a team to have that experience. On the flip side, I think there's always value in having an outsider that can guide the conversation, that can be that alongside support to simply allow the conversation to move forward, to bring forward some of the right questions and the right conversation pieces at the right time. So this is part of GRIP and GRIP Plus, anything that's being created under that, anything that is standing alone without Birkman, we are making it to where teams can order and take it without a coach.
So will there be helps for that person that feels like they've got a pretty good, healthy team? Hey, we're just going to use this as another conversation starter. There are going to be some helps for them that they can use?
Yeah, one of the main things that we wanted to make sure that we're creating, and actually, and if we're talking long term, what are some of the new things that'll be on the horizon? We're doing this for all of the products, our assessments, is we're creating facilitation guides. They will be step-by-step processes that a team leader can take or a coach can take as an outsider to facilitate a meaningful conversation. So we have right now for our values, we've already created 2 of those. We've created one for a team that's in formation, that's just beginning, and we've created one for team development. The one that hasn't been created yet is the conflict. But that I would say look within probably the next 4 months for that to be created as well. But these facilitation guides will be an added resource for those individuals. I think the other piece that I wouldn't want to overlook is just the reporting that's available. This is not just, hey, I'm going to bring my 2-page report that I got after completing it, but there is a team report also in the web portal that is available. And it's either available to the team leader or the team leader can actually make it available to the entire team as well. So they can begin to look at those assessments or look at those values, go back to those and see where there's alignment, where there's similarity, and somewhere there's either uniqueness or variation.
In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to want to open up the conversation to our panel of participants that are going to have other questions, but a couple of things before just cueing you guys so you'll have your questions ready. What we haven't covered here. Number one, will there be training for coaches then specifically to use this assessment?
There will. So here's your teaser for next month. Next month we'll be bringing forward GRIP Plus as a more comprehensive tool that will include GRIP as we know it. It will include our values as we're discussing today, and it'll also include one other component called discerning direction together. Discerning direction together is a team-based direction assessment. It's essentially how can I understand where the Lord is leading me in this season, as well as where's he leading our team? How does what the Lord's doing inside of me, where I have calling or passion, how does that play into where we are headed as a team? Those 2 assessments together, our values and discerning direction, that is plus the GRIP Plus. Get it? See how that works there? But that plus, there will be an add-on training for plus. So our values won't be a standalone where we'll have that. We'll actually have the 2 together. Eventually down the road, we may do a true standalone just for our values. But for today, be looking probably April to see the first pilot of plus training to be out there. And then I'll go ahead and throw in a plug right now for Set in Motion, which will be a gathering of people that want to meaningfully have a conversation about how we can move forward in unity for the kingdom, so that more people will know Jesus. That is being hosted by Ida We, obviously the parent company or the overarching organization from GRIP-Birkman. And so that will be in Orlando, Florida, May 3 through 5. And at that event, we will actually be doing a plus facilitator training and a GRIP plus facilitator training. And so that will equip then individuals, if they want to come in early to participate in that, come in a half day or come in a day early, be a part of the GRIP plus facilitator training, and then stay for the event, where we'll be digging into a lot of great things around unity in the body of Christ.
So everybody be sure and mark your calendars for May 3 through 5. And the GRIP Plus training would be would be like on May the 2nd?
It'll actually be on the 3rd. It's just that
3rd.
you'll have to probably arrive on the 2nd, or
Right.
get a really early flight in, so you can be ready to go first thing in the morning on the 3rd.
Excellent, excellent. So that'll be GRIP Plus training that will include our values and discerning direction together, for coaches that want to use this and have this in their toolkit, in their coaching toolkit. So John, the one other now broader question, what else would you like to share with us about the assessment, or would you like to walk us through anything of the details of the assessment before I open up the mic for questions?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I'll mention that we don't talk about a lot in our community is sort of, what do I do if I have a team that's reached out to me that isn't a faith-based organization, or where maybe the team leader is a believer, but the rest of the team isn't? What can I do for them, or how can I serve them, or how do I approach that? I think our values is going to be a really meaningful tool for that. I'll give you an example. So I work inside a large healthcare organization right now, and there's a team, and I'm facilitating an all-day meeting, strategic planning, sort of typical meeting that I would facilitate, but they always try to throw in this little 60 or 90-minute team build. Well, let's do something around team building. And so I just encouraged them. I said, well, there's an assessment called Our Values that will allow us to look at our team values together and to have this conversation. Is that something you might be interested in? And they were. And so I think that our values will be that sort of of an opportunity. I think it'll be a segue into things. Now, as believers, would I ever have my only focus being our values? No, I think it's an incomplete conversation, but it does facilitate us coming in, showing value as a coach, showing value through an assessment that's providing something unique that they won't have seen somewhere else, that then becomes an entree into other conversations where we may be able to help teams move forward together. I think the other uniqueness is you can take it as an individual, but our goal in this is really not that this would be taken as an individual. It's a team-based assessment. So a lot of the different team-based assessments are, well, here's yours for free, and then you can decide if there's value in someone else. And we really want to approach it the opposite. We want to say, hey, if you're not going to take this as a team, what's the value in it? And not that there's not, right? We all know that me having self-awareness is important, but that's not the end goal. And so from the inception of this, the goal was always to make it a team conversation. And so as you're thinking as a coach, how do I position this, or where does this go? It's really something where I would just say, our goal is that it would feel a little awkward if you just do it by yourself, that really this being done in the context of team will have much more meaning and value for the team, for the individuals, even as they're going through it.
Great. All right. I really do want to open this up then for some of our participants, panelists that are with us. If you'll just unmute and just speak right up with any of your questions.
I'll just pop in. It's really not a question, it's an observation. This is Galen, by the way. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah. Hey, Galen.
My niche has been conflict, because that's part of my academic training, conflict resolution, mediation, and negotiation. So what I see the value of the values as a kind of a launching point if I were using this for conflict, One of the things that we talk about in dealing with conflict is a shared understanding. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gottman and his work on predominantly with couples, but one of the things he talks about is a shared understanding or a shared meaning. And values are at the core of the meanings that we attach to different situations. And if you can get at that and increase the level of shared understanding on a team, it's really huge. Because then it's kind of like, you know, using the Birkman, when people begin to understand that this person isn't doing this just to annoy me. They're doing this because that's at their core belief system. And they have attached or assigned meanings to these events, the situation that we're in or whatever. And it's really not about me personally. So it helps to distance that and move to a different levels of conversation within the team. So I think it's a great thing, especially in how I would see it, how I would see that I would use it in going in, whether they're in the middle of conflict or they're just wanting to do, which doesn't happen. In fact, I don't know that I've ever done it, prevention work. So you're typically, at least in my experience, you're going to be in the middle of it. But anyway, I think it's a good tool. I think it's a good, as John was saying, I think you can segue that into many other conversations and other parts of GRIP for the conversation for the team building exercise. So anyway.
I really appreciate the way you pulled out that proactive nature, because I think that's what the varied values, that's what we call when someone has a high somewhere and a low, we've defined it as a varied value. That's what we're identifying, right? Is we're identifying these areas that potentially could create rub, and especially in a team formation. I'm not going to live in that space, you know, for a new team and say, oh, we got to avoid conflict here. But I am going to simply say, hey, let's just put this on our radar. Well, you know, let's acknowledge that, you know, if these are in variation, doesn't mean that we're going to have conflict, but it means that let's be on heightened awareness as we're addressing some things that may highlight that. So yeah, that I really appreciate that. And the other idea that I would just throw out there is understanding as a coach, what is the end goal of the values facilitation will be really important. One of the questions that we've gotten a couple of times is, since it's our value, does that mean that we come out then with team values? Does that mean then that we will have established our team values? Maybe, maybe not. Again, if that's what the team's goal is, then sure, we could add on, okay, so this is where we have some alignment, some similarities. What does that mean that we want to be true then of us as a team in the way that we approach our work? Most of the values that we have in organizations are what we would consider either pay to play or aspirational. Some of them are, you know, hey, be a kind person. Well, that's kind of a pay to play. You know, if you're going to be around here, you know, that's just the way that we do the game. The other one are aspirational, like, you know, hey, we're going to be an organization of excellence. Well, that's nice. You know, what does excellence mean? And is that truly a standard? Those sort of things. So what I mean by that is then how do our personal values then create team values, and how do those align with organizational values? Those are different endpoints that could be really important. One of the examples that I use sometimes is in healthcare, obviously, safety, patient safety is of utmost importance. Well, and that creates very much an environment that is cautious, right? In a lot of ways. So what happens when you have a team that their primary function is to be innovators? How does that fit within the larger culture? And so then understanding where you might experience rub as you're piloting new things, again, allows for a different conversation. And so with a values assessment, then you're provided some of those tools, some of those things that will create a shared language around what people are experiencing, which is really, again, what we're trying to do as coaches, is bring out and have a shared discovery around some of these types of these challenges, some of these opportunities.
Yeah, just listening to you, John, I've been smiling inside because I've been walking with my denomination for 25 years as an executive leader and watching the ups and downs of reformatting leadership teams, as the boss dude steps down or is replaced, right up to the bishop, and thinking through the logistics of using this kind of tool before the teams are developed rather than after the teams are developed, to avoid two scenarios. One, coming in, and I watched this just a few years ago, they worked very hard, got all these guys together, and then realized the team was always going to vote opposite, and never get anything done. And then another guy created a team where they're all yes men. And, this could help with that. I'm right now getting ready for our annual pastors assessment center. We have 9 guys coming through, think they're going to become pastors, and we run them through. The GRIP-Birkman tool is one of the assessments we use for that process. But in the process of preparing for that, I've interviewed each of the 9 men and their spouses. The one guy is coming because he wants to be a church planter. Birkman, all 4 of his little markers are down in the yellow quadrant. And, and as a church planter myself, I just started asking him a question, and he's like, because thinking about system structures needed all in order, and the wild and crazy life of church planting, he needs a different kind of team to walk with him. This would be very helpful. Just so you're making me smile.
Good. Yeah, I think, as we think about it as GRIP-Birkman coaches, where does it fit within what we do with GRIP-Birkman already? And, probably the easiest way to look at it is GRIP-Birkman is one path, GRIP Plus will be another path. They can cross, but they're not going to be truly aligned. Like, as you take your values assessment, because Birkman language, you're going to say, oh, that relates to that blue circle square, or that relates to that green asterisk. We're going to naturally make some of those things. And we may even say, oh, that relates to that gift of exhortation. That relates to this. And that's okay. I'm fine with that. But just as we do with people who come in with Myers-Briggs or DISC or with another foundational knowledge of other assessments, I would just encourage you to allow the assessment to stand on its own, and then afterwards, after there's an understanding of our values, then if they want to play the integration conversation, great. But just remember how confusing that can be initially for people as they're trying to say, well, this E is just the same as this diamond over, and it's not an apples to apples type of situation. And so as coaches, allow them to take GRIP-Birkman and then do our values, or allow them to do GRIP Plus and then add on the Birkman component. I would say probably don't have anyone take the full gamut from the get-go. I think it's too much information that's too similar, where the languages will be aligned, but they won't feel like they're aligned initially. To someone, it's too much. It would be way too much.
So John, if this would be recommended, you're recommending that if a team has done GRIP-Birkman, this can be a great add-on to that, a great next step. If they've not done GRIP-Birkman, this could be something that they might do as a first step, possibly. Or they might say, yeah, and we'll get to that after we've done these other assessments and walk through them, but not trying to order the whole package all at once.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the other thing that always is going to come up as we're dealing with this, which is cost, right? I mean, the
Thank you.
cost
That was my next question.
The cost on this is, as a standalone, is $10 per person. Well, I mean, that's negligible. That's 2 cups of coffee, right? So, whereas if we're talking about GRIP-Birkman, we're talking about the minimum, the $60 price point type of thing. So I believe for those that are extremely cost conscientious, this may be another opportunity to show the value of an assessment, the value of coaching, and then segue into something more meaningful as you continue on in the coaching relationship.
Very good. Other questions, guys?
I think here the conversation around values is sort of at the the pencil point of something that I'm sort of reflecting on as a therapist, because as I hear the conversation, it sounds like we take the values at face value. And as a therapist, I want to be asking, I find myself wanting to ask the question, where do these values come from? And sometimes values come out of our own personal dysfunction, for lack of a better expression. And so my need for, having my ducks in order and everything clearly defined might grow out of, some experiences in life where that wasn't possible. And so that becomes this value, but then in turn, that placed on a team can lead to significant conflict. So that's kind of what I'm wrestling with. I don't know if there's a question there, but maybe John or Larry, you could speak to that.
I think that's huge, Tony. And I think this
Yeah.
is where values will be an onion. And as coaches and as team leaders, we'll have to decide how many layers we need to unpack together as a team and where there are opportunities for more the one-on-one conversation. But I think, because we could stay at that, well, everything has order and has, needs to be in the same spot for me. Or we can have the conversation of, well, tell me about its origin. And then we could have the conversation of, man, what was that like for you to experience that? And what else did that impact in your life? And those are all just pulling back layers around the same value. And as teams, we'll have to understand the level of safety and vulnerability and the space that we've created for trust to not over pursue something, but allow that conversation with time to go to the appropriate levels for the teams.
That's
John, you
helpful,
mentioned
John.
something very important there, because when we're talking about the what we refer to right now as the continuums, those larger body life values that we have been exploring, and where trust and health, thriving together, learning to abide together in Christ, how does all that fit in with this also?
Yeah, I think that, understanding our personal values in light of how do we together move from I to we? How do we do that collectively? This becomes a key component of us being able to meaningfully connect with one another, less so for operational things as far as, hey, who should do what job description and who's going to be most effective at this or that. There'll be a little bit of that, but really in understanding how to value one another. How can I meaningfully care for someone in a significant way? I think, and as we look at each of those 7 continuums, Larry, each of those 7 different categories where we want to move from I to we, so abiding and thriving and discerning and caring and connecting and trusting and in accomplishing, all 7 of them, us understanding this type of information is simply going to be a catalyst. It's going to be something that will propel us further forward faster as we're moving as a team.
Yeah, Bo, I see
Yeah,
you.
John, I'm sorry, I'm just getting up to speed. I'm looking at the 7 body life values right now. Are the R values, can you name or remind us or put in the chat box, what are the R values?
So the 7 continuums that you're looking at right now, are you talking about the abiding, thriving, discerning? So think of that as a framing for I to we as a whole. The things that we believe need to where we as teams and organizations need to progress from I to we. These are areas where we'll be on journey for as long as we function as teams, right? Where we'll be moving forward. Our values as an assessment is not directly connected to any of these. Frankly, GRIP-Birkman isn't either. None of our assessments, outside of the IDWE overview assessment, which we haven't launched yet. But outside of that singular assessment, the other assessments that we offer are simply a way to facilitate meaningful conversations that will allow us to move forward in a variety of these continuums, in a variety of these principles and practices. So rather than trying to find a direct correlation in one of them, Bo, just think of it as being an enhancer, or as we're trying to learn how to discern together, us understanding values could be pretty important to understanding how we're going to approach shared discernment. For us understanding interdependence on connectedness, us understanding values will be pretty important for us to move forward in interdependence to really grasp the values that we have underlying. Does that make sense?
I think so. So our values right now is just an assessment. It's a battery of questions. It's not necessarily a batch of 5 or 8 values.
Correct. So there are 66 values that we've defined, and it takes you through those 66 to define your top 5 and your bottom 5. That assessment, then, that discernment of those 5 high, 5 low are put into the context of the team, so that then the team can have a conversation around where there's alignment, where there's uniqueness, and where there's variance. Those 3 aspects then will allow us as a team to move forward together. So think of this as a true standalone that can then enhance the conversation for team development.
If you have not gone through the assessment yet, you might find that it's very difficult to, it's more difficult to assign your lowest values than it is the higher values, because you'll look at those and say, well, isn't this important too? Isn't this important too? Well, of course it is. Somebody thinks they're important, and somebody thought that they were all important in some way when we put together that list of 66. But when you start looking and saying, at the end of the day, if I have to choose between this and this, just like you have to do, with so many different questionnaires that we do, where you're in forced pair kind of situation, when you're forced to say, at the end of the day, which one would I leave behind if I had to leave one behind? That then helps you to start looking at what are those low values that I think, John, as you said, that's every bit as important as all the rest of that assessment. When I'm looking and saying, if I have to make choices, what am I going to choose to leave behind to ultimately get to those 5? And I've got my report here. I did it again last night. John, I did a validity check. I went through and did it again after I had done it in October. And 4 of the 5 still came out on the top. I had one that was, really close, and it got in this time and it didn't get in last time. But I think you're going to discover that these 66 values will force you to really think really hard about what is really, really important to you when it comes to the end of the day.
Well, I know it's not going to go well on a podcast necessarily, Larry, but I'm wondering
okay.
if
we can edit it out.
we can share through, do a quick glance at some of the different things that they'll see as they take these. Do you want to do a quick sort of show and tell here? Okay. With just as you come to the website, then you have your dashboard now. If you haven't yet taken the R values, then it'll be grayed out here. But this is where then you'll click to take the assessment. Once you've taken the assessment, then you can click back in and see the complete list of 66 and how you scored them, essentially where you put them. So for each of the values, we're simply doing a high, mid, or low. So very simplistic in its approach. But once you've then completed this, again, you can get down to, you can look at the PDF, get back to it from this space. The fun becomes then as you're having a team go through it, and teams right now is under the profile organizations and teams. Yours will look a little bit different than this, but essentially once you've created a team, then you can click here on the R values. This is a team that of a church that I'm working with near St. Louis right now. And so you'll see all of the team members And then you have a few different views in here. So one is called our values, which is really a combination of the highs that people have identified. So you'll notice as a decent sized team, not a lot of alignment at the top for them. So a couple that have 3 and then a lot that have 2. But if you look at some of the concepts, if you were to look at these words, again, if the goal were to say, well, I wonder what their team values are, then I might not just assume, well, I think it's growth and stewardship. Those are the 2 main ones. No, I might look at what are some of the other words that then overlap. And I might allow them to simply say, hey, what do you see as themes or trends in your highs here? On a low side, there is a lot of alignment. Not a high value for uniqueness, not a high value for tradition or for entrepreneurialism. So what does that tell me? Well, again, I might juxtaposition that against this right here, to just say, okay, so we're about growth, but not necessarily about uniqueness. Well, what does that mean? And so digging into what people see and understand as uniqueness. And it's been interesting. There's been a couple instances in this team over the past couple of years where uniqueness had a negative connotation, and I had to find that out, right? And so you'll find that certain words carry certain meanings, and we have to be ready for that. We have to be understanding that in certain cultures or subcultures, there are certain words that will create greater resistance, if you will. So this is that idea of looking at the team together type of view. I don't see any names here. There's nothing around that. But then I can get down here to the values focus, and I can begin to see the names of the individuals. So this is where I can look at the highs for each person, or I can look at the lows and see what their lows were. I think this becomes really interesting when we start to take this alphabetical view and we begin to see the highs and the lows, and I can just click here to get those varied values, and I can begin to see where there's opportunity, again, to what we we're talking about earlier. Where's there opportunity for conflict? And having worked with this team, some of these are areas where they have RUP, where they've had to address different things at different times. So interesting to sort of look at some of these different things then and begin to think through, as a facilitator, what conversations will be meaningful? Where do I want to go, and then how does that align with what the team leader is, the senior pastor in this case, what he's hoping to accomplish as well. So from a reporting standpoint, you have all of this information, and then you can actually pull the results down into Excel as well. So a lot of things that you can tease out here and play around with. Another interesting thing is you can hide the non-selected, or you can make them visible. So becomes an interesting conversation that no one had accountability as a high or a low. Does that tell me anything? Maybe, maybe not, but it's, again, something, more information than as a coach that you have to take a look at. So just to give you a snapshot of what that looks like, to be able to have the teams see the values just as standalones, and then to be able to connect it with the different names down here as well. So you have a variety of options of ways to look at this. So, and if you go to the Our Values page, then you'll see that we have the facilitation guides. Both of those are on there, as well as a sample report. So we're trying to get you equipped as possible to be able to take a look at it, see if there's a context that fits for you to try it out and to begin using our values.
For this tool, John, and to some extent, even for the classic GRIP-Birkman, it seems to me, and I'm newer in the coaches community, that there's a lot of application for kind of highly knit teams, whether it's a church or parachurch or maybe even some other entity, that are working together regularly, maybe on a daily basis, or a good bit of interaction on a weekly basis. My question, as you know, when you get out there in the real world, there's different kinds of teams. And now with people working from home, some people are spread apart across the country, and some people talk once a month. So I guess maybe answer, we'll start with our values. If you want to speak to GRIP-Birkman generally, to what degree this tool can it be applied to more loosely knit groupings of staff or members, or that are not really structured real tightly?
Yeah, I'll start, but I'd love to hear other people's opinion on this as well. I think this is again, possibly the most versatile tool that we'll have. And for that reason, I think it would be potentially where what I might use as a starting point for that, because it allows, as we talked about with Tony, there's so many layers to this onion that starting at that quote unquote shallow level of us just defining what they are, what are those highs and lows, me saying, hey, share 2 of your highs with us, and why are those highs, or how does that impact our team, or how might it potentially impact our team in the future? Something as simple as that then allows us to see and to understand, how much does this team want to work together? I think, as we have dispersed teams, I think that's one of the key questions that I keep finding myself asking is, where do they need to actually work together, and where is it okay that they're completely autonomous, and where they don't need each other, and where them being on a team is really more in name than anything else. And so I think that we have to begin to understand what is the level of commitment or the desired level of interaction for these teams. But I think this is a great tool to simply have that conversation. And frankly, it might give some window into why people are choosing to lean in or remain back from some of the team activity. So I think it gives us a good insight. As far as GRIP-Birkman as a whole, I think it's how we approach it. I talk a lot of times about the difference between mission teams and a small church volunteer team. A small church volunteer, or even maybe a better example might be a mega church, where that person can hide in the background, or if they don't want to volunteer anymore, then they can just not volunteer anymore. It's not the same on a missions team. You're in a foreign country and you don't know how to survive without your team. Those are very different contexts. Throw in a Christian organization where, it is a true 9 to 5, and you walk away from the job, then what do I have to do? Where do I have to be connected? They are very different. And I think the value of the tool doesn't change. How we use it then changes. And so a coach that's working with a mission team, we got to be here for each other. As it's those other positions, it's man, God designed us to be together for this season. What is he trying, where's the Lord leading us? What does this tell us about our team, and how might we really understand what the Lord's doing in and through us right now based on who he's brought together? So the more that we can get back to that, God designed this team to be together for this season. Let's understand it. Let's have a conversation, because God doesn't make mistakes in relationships. He's not going to somehow make a mistake in who we put together. So let's understand why and how we're together for this season.
John, I definitely agree with what you said. And I think as a team is looking to say, particularly looking at the varied values, where we say, hey, we may have opposing views of what is important to us personally in this regard, but that does not necessarily have to create conflict. It might create some sort of tension on the team. But I think I've used this illustration before in another setting. The team that we work with the I to We leadership team, we have 1 or 2 people on that team who have values for beauty, let's say. And beauty comes up at the bottom of my list. I'm more interested in function than I am in beauty, to be real honest. And I want it to look good, but I want it to be functional first. And when I have to choose, that comes up at the bottom. Well, that could be a point for contention, but instead of it being contention, it's me saying, and I certainly am glad that they have that value, because otherwise some of the stuff that we do would look like, I shouldn't use the word that it might look like. They're going to make sure that it looks good. I'm going to make sure that it's functional, and together we form a stronger team, I think. So I can appreciate those varied values as even saying the same language that we use when we're talking with the GRIP. I actually need you, because you see something as being important that I don't necessarily see as being important, and it might really be more important than I see it.
I did have a question. Just to put something, speak into to the dispersed teams or closer teams. I think they're both unique in the dynamic that they create.
Yeah.
Those that are distant. I'm working with a group right now where they're all over the place, but they don't really get together very much, and it's always virtual. That dynamic is just completely different than it is when I've worked in the same organization with a group that's in Houston, and I go there and work with them, but because they're all in the office together. So that's the unique thing. That made me ask the question. This has probably already been answered, but when you're setting up for the assessment, is there a way that you're supposed to frame it? Example, think about how the values that you have in the work environment, because it's not always the same. I think the values will be there in the home environment, but I may value something in my work environment that it's not really that big a deal for me at home, for example. So is there a framing that's done prior to the taking the assessment? And if there is, is it think about work, or is it think about home, or think about your marriage? I can see where this thing could go, when you set it up, and how this might make the assessment say different things in different environments. I don't know.
Yeah, John, how should we frame this when we're getting a team to do this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's been interesting as we haven't framed it very specifically to your point in the assessment itself, in taking it. And part of the reason is to keep it open so that it can be used in those variety of contexts. So I think as a coach, then it is on us a little bit to share that. I would be of the opinion, it would be interesting. I should probably go back and test out my own hypotheses on this, but that probably about 75 to 80% aren't going to vary very much in context, that your values truly are your values. And then there would be a couple that would be highlighted because of work, and this is so important there, or because of the relationship. And usually, if I'm being completely honest, for me, I would think probably more of those would show up on the low side rather than on the high side, as far as, well, this just really frustrates me in this environment. And you might get some of those, push back on certain things, some of those low values, but I could see how it could be the high as well. Because I haven't framed it with different teams, I will ask, as I'm doing the one-on-one coaching with them, or even in the team facilitation, as you were taking this, what was the lens that you took it with? Were you thinking specifically about this team, or were you thinking wider? And honestly, about 25% typically are saying that I was thinking specifically about this team, and others are just keeping it a more general conversation. So I think it's a good point where we can sharpen that focus down. I will say, from a developmental standpoint of the values, if you look at the 66, we removed certain values from the conversation that we felt were just very individualistic values. I want to make a lot of money. Well, it's not really going to, it may impact the team, but it's not going to impact our dynamics in specific ways. And so we remove some of the very individualistic sort of things. And so the ones that we have here as 66, we feel it's a pretty comprehensive list, but they are ones that we believe will impact team dynamics most acutely.
Hey, Rodney, I noticed you had a question too. Before we sign off, we want to be sure and get to that.
Yeah, my question was similar to Galen's. Like, does the assessment look for worldview, or does it direct the person, like, you're doing this because you're on a team? So with that team, what do you value? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, great question. And I think as a coach, you can choose how you want to frame that. I would say by design, it's set up to be worldview. It's set up to be holistic, but it can be narrowed down to, for this specific team. If you're struggling, what I would probably do as a coach or facilitator is I would say, hey, stay worldview. And then as you're trying to narrow, if you're really struggling, then maybe think about what, in the context of this team, what's particularly relevant. But I would probably, as much as possible, try to keep it worldview. Part of the reason for that is, again, if they were to switch teams or be a part of a different team, we don't want them retaking the assessment every time. Values are values. So we want them to be thinking, okay, these are the things that are universally important to me.
Thanks. That's helpful. Thank you.
Well, guys, we have come to the top of another hour. It's always hard for me to believe how quickly the time passes when we're talking about something that is so interesting. And I'm sure we're going to need to come back again, John, and visit this some more later on. But for right now, thanks for joining us again for GRIP-Birkman Coaches Cafe. And we hope that you will just do everything you can. Hopefully, you'll be able to use this particular tool to help you in your task of building unity in the body of Christ so more people will know Jesus. Bye-bye now.